Okay, well, diving into episode 71, Mist and Whimsy, we like to do a little recap of what happened in the episode, just because the episodes are about 4 or 5 hours long. So what we like to do, we like to give a recap, and then we cut that out and put it as just a separate video on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching just the recap, you can click the link in the description to check out our full thoughts and discussions on the episode. And of course, Critical Role, there's a lot of awesome stuff that happens in a given episode. So if you have thoughts of your own or theories or things you want to chat about, definitely go to that video and drop a comment and let us know what you think. But having said that, like I mentioned, episode 71 of Campaign 3, Mist and Whimsy. This episode opens up on the island of Slaval. I don't know if they quite know it's an island or not. Whenever they arrive, they find themselves in this dense, humid forest. There is fog everywhere. In fact, it's very much like waking up in the middle of a jungle is kind of the feel of it. Like they hear rustling of animals. In fact, in a little bit, they're going to actually see a shadow of some massive creature. So they're very wary about making too much noise. However, they do want to try to figure out exactly where they are. Now, Orem does do a perception check, I think like a 30 or a 34 or something insane,
Typical.
like Orem, typically does. Chetney is going to try to smell the air, and they do know that there must be the ocean nearby. So they decide to head that direction to where they eventually find themselves on a cliffside. With the ocean crashing up against a black pebble beach. I believe Imogen is going to cast Fly on herself, and I think she also casts it on Orem, who flies up and just tries to get a better picture of the island. And in fact, the island as a whole is literally covered by this heavy, thick fog. And in the fog, that is where they in fact see this massive shadowy creature about 100 feet long that is moving through the fog. So coming back down, Orem explains what they've seen, and they're not really sure where to go, what to do. They just know they're looking for Girona, the shore shrew, who Keyleth had been given, had received some counseling from, or was mentioned in an earlier episode. Separate to this, Fern's going to cast Pass Without a Trace and decide, you know what, why don't we just get a good night's sleep so that we can start fresh in the morning and figure out, where do we go from here? Now, as they're moving through the forest and they're trying to find a good campsite, they're also noticing these little tiny pixie-like, I think Matt describes them as basically like lizards with wings, like little tiny, like inch tall creatures, not wearing any clothes, like some kind of like native creature of some kind. And these things are flying by, moving around, kind of staying a little bit wary to the party. And so they do also come across a destroyed campsite, and Chetney is going to cast, I don't know if you can hear like the knocking on my door, by the way. It's my toddler trying to get my attention, but I'm just pressing through, So anyway, the Travis via Chetney is going to do his grim psychometry ability, where he can find out the history of a certain location, and does it on this abandoned campsite and sees visions of basically men running for their lives as some kind of creature attacks the camp. They continue on from this place until they eventually find what feels like a good camping place. They still don't want to attract too much attention, so Fern actually casts plant growth to cause like these plants to grow up over them, kind of like this makeshift safe camping place. In addition to this, there's more of these pixies that show up. FCG is going to cast Speak with Animals and doesn't seem able to really chat with them. But then eventually, I think speaks, it's not comprehend languages, tongues. FCG eventually casts tongues and begins to speak to these tiny little creatures, one of which decides to bless FCG by pooping into his hand. So FCG, they get like this little poop in their hand, and I think it had actually like a lavender smell to it, or it wasn't like totally wild. But they begin to basically figure out like, okay, what's going on here? Who are you guys? And also during this whole thing, there's also been like this loud noise that's been happening every 10 or 15 minutes in the distance. And these little creatures explain that this is one of many, I can't remember what they called it, but I think about at Yellowstone, like the natural geysers. Matt sort of describes something like that continuously, they're all over the island. Do you remember what he called them, by the way?
I don't remember like the specific name, but yeah, like geysers. Kinda.
Yeah, basically geysers. That's like what they're hearing. And then they also ask about the shadowy creature, which the tiny pixies explain. Oh, that's the smelly one. They also ask, FCG asks about, hey, do you know where Torres is or Girona? And the creatures basically say, yeah, you're going to want to do a big fire, like make a big fire that'll attract Torres. And they're like, okay, big fire sounds like a good decision. So they go to sleep, they wake up in the morning, and they're like, okay, Operation Build a Big Fire. So they get led up to this big volcanic hill. They actually start to wonder, like, are these pixies, like, can they be trusted? Or are they potentially, like, leading us to the shadowy creature to feed to it? Imogen actually does do an insight check and gets a whisper from Matt. But all is to say, they gather some dry wood. Fern's going to produce flame. Laudna is going to cast fireball on it, and they create this massive pyre. And it's as this is happening in the edges of the fog around them, Chetney begins to hear something moving, and Matt basically describes this, I think, like chameleon or like almost like Komodo, like lizard-like creature that I think was made of like volcanic rock that comes out of the fog, massive creature. And Chetney tries to stay still and actually rolls a 21 for a stealth check. And yet Matt describes the smelly one sniffing. And I think he reveals it even rolled a natural 20 when they came back from the break, but snaps at Chetney. We roll initiative, and that is where we go to break. So you want to take it from there?
Yes, sir. Okay, so come back from break, we pick up, and like Blake said, the smelly one actually hit a nat 20 for this attack on Chetney, and ends up dealing 62 damage to him in one go.
Kind of a lot.
Yeah, a little bit. So we roll initiative, and as always, just kind of try to hit the highlights here to speed through things, but Chetney having taken a massive swipe of damage, the first thing that happens is Orem runs in and bait and switches with Chet to provide him some cover.
Right.
Imogen summons a Rayloran and has it attack. Everyone is just launching attacks at this thing. And FCG actually compels it to run away and is successful. So while the rest of the party is littering their attacks, the next round begins, and everyone hears this like thunderous noise and this loud croaking, which the smelly one seems to react to in fear, and all the little pixies are excited. But combat continues. So before the smelly one runs due to its compulsion from FCG, it does attack first, and hits Orem, who is now, the one right in front of it, and does a ton of damage to Orem. And then it begins to run away due to the compulsion. FCG heals Orem, who is on like death's door, by the way, from how much damage he's taken across the 2 rounds already. And then Ashton grabs Orem and kind of drags him to safety. The next round continues, and the croaking gets louder. The smelly one getting even more afraid. And it's also starting to look rough as well from like 3 rounds of just everybody in Bell's Hells attacking it. And it's at this point that a massive 25-foot toad like rains down in from the sky, having leapt there, and slams into the ground. Everyone's like, what the heck? And Imogen actually gets a glimpse into its mouth and can see like a furnished living room, complete with a fireplace in there.
Nice.
So she reaches out telepathically and says, Torres, like, are you Torres? We were sent by the Tempest. And it doesn't respond with language, but Matt says that it acknowledges her and basically tells her to, like, hey, just like kind of get out of the way. So Imogen lets everybody know, like, hey, this thing's on our side. And as we continue through initiative, the smelly one's next turn is just bolting as far as it can away from here. But Torres leaps again into the air and lands right behind it, and then basically like flips it off this like cliff that they're on, beyond the horizon into the ocean. Makes quick work of this thing. So combat is essentially over now. Torres makes his way back to the party and opens his mouth, basically letting them all into this house that is inside of him. And inside there are like log partitions and different chambers with artwork and plants. And in a rocking chair, there sits an old female turtle humanoid. She introduces herself as Girona, and if they know Kiki, then they are trusted friends. We now basically have a lot of conversations for the rest of the episode. But she tells them that Torres is her companion, her home, and her guardian, and that the smelly one that they just fought is actually called a berry mondolo, and it is a child of the Esquala. I couldn't read my own handwriting, but I think that's what it said.
Hmm.
Which is essentially the serpent that travels around and protects the reef surrounding the islands and lays eggs, and the eggs hatch into the berry mondolos. Orem at this point then asks, "Oh yeah, we also saw like some massive sky creatures in the clouds. Like, what's up with that?" And Drana says those are cloud jaws, and they're basically like sky whales. They're not evil per se, but they are dangerous, and they eat what they can find in the sky, which is a big reason why airships don't travel to this part of the world. The party then learns that Torres has been alive for centuries, and Adriana basically just inherited him. She doesn't know who the previous tenant of Torres was, but she's here now, and they are kind of the guardians of this place, or at least Torres is. They then ask, or excuse me, Joanna asks, like, why have you come? And talks about how, she helped Keyleth, and Keyleth has an incredible heart. And, she was able to help her alleviate some of the burden on her heart. And they're like, yeah, like, Keyleth told us about that. Like, how did you become a grief counselor? And Joanna says that, she's seen many things in her long life, both wonderful and terrible, and wonderful from terrible. So she has perspective on a lot of things and a connection with the natural life force of Exandria, and she just wants to help people who have had similar experiences. She tells them that she's been on the Shattered Teeth her entire life, which is some 120 odd years. But then we quickly find out that it's like 120 years in spirit time, which is closer to maybe 400 years in their time. But the group kind of gets this feeling that like maybe she's kind of like a little bit lost in the sauce here. So we don't truly know how old she is, but it seems like she's pretty old. And she also reveals that she only stays on this one singular island of the Shattered Teeth, but there are 43 in total. So Ashton then tells her kind of why they're here and quickly about his history and the Hishari, and how he's just looking for answers and was told about the Tree of Atrophy and that he could maybe find some clarification here with the tree. And Tirana says that Yvonne Trevere, which is the tree, took all the sorrow and all the loss that was destroyed in the calamity upon themselves and became a memory of those, and for those that were on this island, and they took root to be a vessel for that sorrow, for the sorrow of others. And Yvonne Trevere is one of the few views into death from the material plane. Sure, we'll be discussing this, but it is still a living entity. It was once a Gaujashari that protected Exandrias through the Age of Arcanum. The tree is a lot of things. It is between spaces and can be dangerous to some, but give purpose to others. And it can also apparently reveal the path toward one's own death. Um, Girona says that that is on a different island though, and to get there, there's many boats that you could possibly use to travel. They talk about potentially teleporting with Imogen, but she warns them, if you do try to flag down a boat, know that there are different factions here in the Shattered Teeth, and they don't all get along. Um, Also, to make it even more difficult, all of these islands are not stationary; they are ever shifting. The nature of the destruction of Dominus left a perpetual churning element of energy throughout the area. So you either have to pray to your gods to find your way or keep up with a good cartographer, of which there are none on the island. But there are lots of shipwrecks, and those can be looted, and maps can sometimes be found. It's at this point that Girana hands Chetney a map that she most recently found, but it was 12 years ago. And on this map, I think there are 3 islands and a bunch of charts. Um, but hearing of these shipwrecks, they realize perhaps they could go find one and repair one, especially with Chetney's expertise with wood. And maybe that could be how they get around. But he says, I'll have to check it out to see if it's possible for me to repair something like that. So they're sitting there trying to determine, okay, how are we going to get to the island of Kalutha, which is where Montrevere is? And they ask about the factions she alluded to earlier, and she tells them of the Ascended Host, and an area called the Revaspire, I believe. I might be saying that wrong,
Yeah.
which is like a settlement that they guard. She says that they respect and expect honesty. And she also tells them of the Wandermen, who are a potential way that they could flag down a ship. They could flag down a Wanderman ship, but they will expect payment and don't show too much money or else you'll wake up beneath the reefs, she says. She then gives them a compass that once belonged to the dread captain Erlu Novos. And it's enchanted to be attuned to the islands because Novos was once a wild mount pirate, and his reign of terror was actually ended by the Ascended Host in an ambush over 100 years ago. But he made a dark deal, and his ship still haunts the waters. So Girana says that if you place this compass in the water, that should summon his like ghostly ship named the Crimson Abyss, and it'll come try to like claim the compass back. But she says that perhaps you could bargain with Captain Novos into a mutually beneficial agreement that would maybe allow him to recover his lost treasure. So basically, an exciting but dangerous option if necessary. Um, It's at this point that Chetney casts Hunter's Bane on the compass to learn more about it, and Matt describes him getting this vision of a pirate ship amidst a fierce battle, and there's like a bearded dwarf captain that is like shouting to the gods and like cursing at the sky. And Matt says you can't make out like what he's actually saying, but you notice a bolt of lightning comes and strikes him in the head, and he falls to the deck, presumably dead, with blood pooling behind him, but his face curled into a smile. So the party is pretty excited about this whole ghost ship thing. But before they, make their next steps, Ashton does ask about the Titans that died in this part of the world. And Toronto tells him about Roshan, the Emperor of Fire, and Kamort, the Empress of Earth. Um, and she says that, it's dangerous around here, mostly because of this energy and the stuff that happened. So it's going to be really dangerous. So let me send you guys with a little bit of a care package. And so she scurries off, but quickly returns with a thick, brackish vial, a yellowish bottle, and an empty looking vial that gives off light. She also gives them 2 reef moss balms, which are basically greater healing potions, and a slick shimmer oil, which makes you slippery and basically harder to hit. And finally, a vial of cleansing flame, which can cure a number of maladies but will burn you in the process. So after that, FCG returns the kindness by giving Girana some cookies that they've been baking, and basically says, that he admires her for her therapy and that he dabbles in being a therapist as well, but he's not very good at it, and he's actually not even sure if he's a person. It's at this point that Girana like takes FCG's face and says, "I can see within you that you carry very deep grief, but do not think you are incapable of helping others, and others can help you as well. So perhaps Ashton is not the only one seeking Yvonne Trevere."
Hmm.
Um, And Girona actually invites FCG to come back to her sometime, and perhaps they can have a little talk, a session. Um, Finally, Chetney asks, "Hey, what's the key to such a long life that you've led?" And she hands him a vial and tells him it's for stamina. Um, she then tells everybody to hold on as Torres is going to leap and bound them toward the North Shore, where they can check out some of these shipwrecks. Um, so they do just that, and they arrive. And Bell's Hells begins to exit Torres, but Ashton actually hangs back a little bit and says, "How do you know to grieve if you don't know what was taken from you?" And Girana says that, you just don't focus on the loss, focus on what you've gained. It can only weigh you down as much as you're willing to let it. So Ashton then follows and exits, and the crew makes their way toward the shoreline, and that's where the episode ends. Again, episode 71 of Campaign 3, Mist and Whimsy. Again, if you want to check out our full discussion, which we will be launching into now, check out the link in the description.